Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to the AME Food Testing Show. Today's topic, the preventative controls of FSMA, with Dr. Gillian Dagan, Chief Science Officer, ABC Research Laboratories. As the Chief Science Officer of ABC Research Laboratories, Dr. Dagan serves as a technical resource to clients in all matters of food safety and quality. Dr. Dagan leads the scientific efforts of the company, managing developments as well as scientific partnerships for research and discovery. She maintains scientific integrity in existing and new endeavors, as well as serves as a source of valid scientific information for ABC Research Laboratory associates and clients. In August of 2004, Dr. Gillian Dagan joined ABC Research Corporation as Director for Product Performance Services. Under her direction, the department concentrates on product quality evaluation, shelf life studies, ingredient applications, product comparisons, and sensory testing. She enjoys working with all sectors of the food industry, but especially food service. Dr. Dagan brought expertise with in-depth sensory research and quality assurance testing to ABC. She received her Ph.D. in food science from the University of Florida, concentrating in food processing, protein chemistry, and sensory science. She has sensory experience for a number of sectors in the food industry and is a trained tester for a number of food products and commodities. Now, join with me, Dr. Gillian Dagan. Dr. Dagan?
Good morning, Andy.
Welcome to the show again.
Thank you. How's it going?
Just great. Would you like to update us on any of your recent activities?
Oh, gosh. We're just keeping busy here around the lab. Let me think. I don't know. We've been honestly trying to keep up with the preventative controls and the produce safety rules since we finally heard the FDA make a peep. We were excited to hear what they had to say, and we're just trying to wrap our heads around it so we can answer questions for our clients.
Wonderful. Let's begin with our topic. What is the Food Safety Modernization Act of 2011?
Food Safety Modernization Act was a law that was signed into effect in January of 2011, and it's kind of a comprehensive group of regulations that the FDA wants to put forth to help strengthen the safety and security of our food supply here in the U.S. It not only looks at preventing food safety domestically, it also addresses imported product. And then there are very specific parts of the Act. One we're going to talk about today, the preventative controls, and then there are also produce safety rules. So it really is an all-encompassing kind of food safety system. It does incorporate some of the ideas of HACCP that we've all become very familiar with, and then it actually goes into a little bit more detail about the preventative idea and risk-based food safety.
Great. You know, it's been a bit of a buzz here recently with the new guidance the FDA has recently discussed in various formats, webinars, direct discussions at conferences. What is the guidance of the recently published regulations? How do they offer any help for food producers?
Well, we've seen two recent regulations, proposed regulations, come forth from the FDA. Preventative controls for human food, and we've also seen the produce safety proposed regulations. The guidance that the FDA has given, in my opinion so far, has been a really broad overview for food processors. Again, these are proposed regulations. It's still not the final draft. So we have the proposed ideas out there that outline the expectations of the FDA for certain processors, proposed ideas of who would be exempt from certain aspects of the regulations. It doesn't get into compliance too much because it's still a proposed regulation, but what's great about these proposed regulations is that you can go on the FDA website or attend one of their webinars or look at some of their PowerPoint decks and see kind of how the FDA is seeing the issue, how they're going to, what kind of compliance they're going to expect in these regulations. And right now, you can actually make comments on preventative controls for human food. And if you wonder what that means, it's an interesting thought in the U.S. that we have the FDA that makes regulations, and a regulation is not, it's not like a legislation. A legislation is voted on, either directly by constituents or by elected officials of constituents. A regulation is a rule that we all have to abide by that's just put out by an agency. So it's kind of an interesting thing. Well, we live in the U.S. How do I get to voice my opinion on what a regulation should look like? You actually can voice your opinion on every single regulation that comes out. There is always a comment period for a proposed rule. The comment period is actually open until May 16th this year for preventative controls on human foods. And you can make comments in writing. You can do it electronically, online. You can do it, if you wanted to use snail mail, you can type up a letter and send it to the FDA. And the FDA is actually also holding some town hall meetings in different parts of the U.S. during this comment period where you can go. You can listen to the FDA officials, explain the proposed regulation. You can ask them questions, and you also can voice your opinion. And the FDA is charged with the responsibility to read all of the written comments, listen to all of the comments given at town hall meetings, and really incorporate those into the final guidance. FDA will always say we need help, we want buy-in, and we want opinions from the industry, from academia. We can't do it alone. So they really do value these comments that are given during the comment period, and it allows you as an individual, or it allows trade groups or whomever to go ahead and put in their opinion and have it be heard. So it's a really good system.
So Dr. Dagan, when you mentioned that anyone can send in comments regarding the new proposed regulations, does that mean really anyone, even the smallest farmer, that they would listen to their comments? That's correct.
The smallest farmer, a citizen, maybe that just the only way they're affiliated with the food industry is that they eat food. Anyone can go ahead and put in comments, and it can be those comments can be related to the science of the regulation. They could be related to the fiscal impact of the regulation. For instance, if it's a small farmer and they want to talk about how this new regulation is going to cost them money and how, as a small farmer, it makes an even bigger difference. So you can really touch on any parts of the regulations, and anybody can submit comments.
Excellent. Let's move on to our next topic, which is what are the proposed preventative controls that the FDA is discussing in the new regulations?
So in FSMA, there's two sets of preventative controls. And there's one for human food, and there will be one for animal food and feed. So today I'm just going to talk about human food. So there are the preventative controls applies to any facility that is required to register with the FDA. And this could be anybody that manufactures, processes, packs, or holds food, or grows food. Farms are included. So again, it's for those folks who need to register with FDA under FDA's current food facility registration regulations. And this even goes to, you might want to think about grain elevators or silos, or even just dry warehouses. So it expands, I think, the people who are affected a little bit more than some of our previous food safety regulations. So that's one of the most important things to look at. There are exemptions and modifications for those affected. So for small farms or small businesses, there may be exemptions or modifications based on the size of the business, depending on what types of food somebody packs. If it's a certain low-risk manufacturing or processing facility or a certain low-risk food, they may be exempt from certain portions of the preventative controls. So there are very specific categorizations that can allow some businesses to be exempt. But all in all, this includes manufacturers, processors, warehouses, farms, and what we're talking about any of those activities, the manufacture, the processing, the holding of foods, even some of the things like on-farm packing of fruits and vegetables. So let's say you're gonna pack in the field straight onto ice broccoli. It's never going to go to a quote unquote a packing house or even a food processing environment. It may just get ice packed right there in the field. So those type of activities is actually something novel that FDA is defining in this regulation as well. So it's going to be a very comprehensive group of what we would all consider food manufacturers and processors, and then I think a very comprehensive group of activities these people perform. So I really feel like FDA in this sense of who's covered by this proposed rule, it's very broad and very comprehensive. They have been able to really define everyone's role in the complete food supply chain. Secondarily, there are kind of two parts to preventative controls for human foods. There are new proposed regulations that talk about hazard analysis and a risk-based preventative controls measure. So I'll call it kind of HACCP, but much more specific HACCP. And then there's a secondary part that talks about updating the current good manufacturing practices. So if you'd like, I can go over the hazard analysis and risk-based preventative controls first, if that's okay.
That sounds excellent. If you could focus in on those preventative controls and then later discuss how a third-party laboratory can help with compliance if those proposed regulations go through.
Sure. So the first part of preventive controls is this hazard analysis and risk-based preventive controls that would require all of these food facilities, we'll call them, that are covered by this regulation to comply with hazard analysis and have a risk-based food safety plan in place. It's kind of HACCP on steroids a bit, because the way that it differs from a traditional HACCP plan is that you would still have the same hazard analysis, and again, you're looking for intentional and unintentional food contamination and food safety hazards. But the thing that's different is this risk-based preventive controls. These preventive controls could exist in addition to critical control points, or they could be the same as critical control points. So you may not have a critical limit for a preventive control. So in my opinion, it adds a little bit more detail to a HACCP plan, or it allows somebody like a farm that's doing on-farm packing to list out some preventative controls that they can apply to ensure the safety of their food that wouldn't really make sense in a traditional HACCP plan. So again, each facility would be required to prepare and implement a written food safety plan. So they're calling it a food safety plan rather than a HACCP plan. And the steps in that plan would be to go ahead and conduct a hazard analysis. So we all are familiar with that from HACCP. So identifying and evaluating known or reasonable foreseeable hazards for each type of food manufactured, all of your ingredients, all of that. Secondarily, they want you to look at preventative controls. So these could be controls in your processing that you set up. These could be how you control food allergens in your processing facility, having a recall plan, having your SSOPs, your sanitation plan in place. They all are based off of the hazards you have identified in your hazard analysis. Again, they don't all have to have a critical limit like a critical control point in a HACCP plan, but again, you're saying I've identified this hazard. This is how I'm going to mitigate my risk at this point, and you're giving an explanation of what type of control you have to prevent the hazard from actually occurring. You're still going to have the monitoring aspect of a HACCP plan. So again, how are you going to monitor what you're doing to make sure that you're implementing those preventative controls, and you're also going to have corrective actions. So if your plan goes out of control, if a preventative control does not result in preventing a hazard, what kind of corrective actions are you going to have in place? So again, knowing what you're going to do if something bad actually happens. So again, it's all preventative. And then rounding out the food safety plan, you have verification and record keeping, same two steps that we think about in a traditional HACCP plan. So again, it's just taking a HACCP plan, adding in maybe some other points of control that you really couldn't define as a critical control point in the past because you didn't have a critical limit for those things, but they were still very much germane to preventing a food safety issue in your plant. Something else very specific that the FDA did touch on, and I think it was about time that they said this out loud, was that a qualified individual is required to prepare the food safety plan, develop the hazard analysis, validate the preventive controls, review records, and conduct a reanalysis of the food safety plan in a timely basis. And they define a qualified individual in this proposed rule as an individual that's either been required to successfully complete training in accordance with standardized curriculum or be otherwise qualified through job experience to develop and apply a food safety system. So I think that right there, that definition of a qualified individual, is going to be very important for a number of registered facilities. Many facilities will have somebody on staff that has undergone training, that probably prepared their food or their HACCP plan in the past, and there won't be issue. But I think for some of the smaller facilities, some of the farms, some of the non-traditional processors that are now being grouped into this new regulation, identifying that qualified individual is going to be a very interesting job. To the second part of your question, how can a third-party lab help a registered facility in this process? Third-party labs are a great resource for information on possible hazards in your processing facility. It'll be interesting to see. I have a feeling that FDA will allow that qualified individual to be somebody that you outsource this job to. It'll be interesting to see in the final rule how they define that. But we can always help people talk through their processing, look at preventative hazard, doing a hazard analysis and talk about the preventative controls. And then once they have that, let's say they already have a fairly robust food safety plan in effect, going through and validating those preventative controls quite often will be, doing allergen swabs if you're talking about controlling food allergen cross-contamination. Third-party labs provide that service. Going through and looking at environmental swabs to validate your sanitation plan. So doing all types of validation work, whether it's on finished product testing or an environmental swab, those are the ways that a third-party lab can interact with a registered facility and really help them through completing this whole plan.
Dr. Dagan, that is an excellent explanation of the challenges that these new regulations pose to our food production, food quality, food safety, and food security managers. Why would working with a third-party lab in 2013 be critical? I think you've answered it already. You've kind of danced around it, but let's get it.
I think it's going to be critical for not only the preventative controls half, but also that the second half that I didn't really touch on, the revisions of the current good manufacturing practices, very specifically in the CGMP part of the discussion in this proposed rule. FDA very specifically mentions contamination of food, but cross-contamination of food by allergens. And I think that second part, that allergen note, is really, that's what's going to throw people for a loop. It may be something that they had identified allergens in their original HACCP plans, but when they go back through this full written food safety plan, it's going to be something that they're going to have to very specifically address and, again, validate. So doing that validation with a third-party lab in 2013, I think, is very important. One, third-party labs have in-depth knowledge about the proper way to test for allergens. There are a number of different allergen testing methods out there, some of which have higher limits of detection or lower limits of detection. Some test for certain types or certain portions of the protein of interest that you're looking at to represent a certain allergen. I feel like it's that very in-depth technical knowledge that we as laboratories are expected to have. That's our business. And, just as let's say a donut manufacturer, they should be the experts of processing donuts. At third-party labs, we should be the experts of the proper ways to test and validate things. So I think that for the validation portion of all of this, it really should be a best practice to go to a third-party lab to get that kind of expertise, to also have expertise in understanding your results. Okay, well, I got 3.5 parts per million. What does that mean? Is that good? Is that bad? To have the ability to understand your results afterwards and then tailor your food safety plan to that, or tailor your processing methods to that, or your food allergen and sanitation operating procedures to those answers, so you can really nail down your food safety plan and put a good one in place.
Well, that's an excellent summary. I think if I were to frame our discussion today, it would be that food producers, watch out, it's coming. You're going to be required to produce a food safety plan. That includes a HACCP program by a qualified individual that's going to require validation testing. And then, more importantly, as you've already highlighted, we're going to need to have somebody interpret those test results that knows what they're talking about. And if you could illustrate just a little bit more, how can ABC Laboratories help in that area?
Sure.
Because they may already have a third-party lab they do business with.
Sure. ABC Research Laboratories can help in the fact that we have been testing environmental swabs, whether they are for microbial contamination or whether they are for allergens, and we do every allergen you can possibly think of. That has been a core competency of ours for years. We've evaluated many different types of microbial test platforms, allergen kits and platforms, and we've identified what we feel are the most robust, accurate, precise ways of testing for environmental sampling. And I think environmental sampling is going to be a really, really big part of complying with the future finalized preventative controls for human foods regulation. ABC also is a lab that has worked with every food out there, every food, beverage, raw ingredient. We have a lot of experience. We know what to expect with certain types of foods. If you're looking at putting together your hazard analysis, we've had experience with everything out there, so we can give some guidance there. We also have a partner lab that does training. So as far as having that, identifying a qualified individual on your staff may incorporate identifying an individual and then sending them to a proper training class. And we have a partner lab that provides training on all different levels of food safety, HACCP, preventative controls, from basic to more sophisticated training. So we can really help firms either just fine-tune maybe their validation procedures, or if they're starting from the ground up, we can really help them get some good training as well.
Excellent summary of the distinction between your facility and another third-party lab that may be out there that they're currently using but has not been optimized, particularly for allergens. Well, let me allow you at this time, because I know your time is valuable, to offer your concluding remarks to our approximately 37,000 listeners.
Thanks, Andy. Just to wrap up today's discussion, again, today we talked about a little bit of the proposed preventative rules, or a preventative proposed rule on human foods. It's an interesting part of FSMA. It took FDA a good while to come out with it, and I think you can see there's a lot of work behind it, and there's just still a lot to be understood about how that final rule is going to look. At ABC Research, we are keeping our ear to the ground and have a good relationship with FDA to kind of, it helps us wrap our heads around the regulations. We can call, find out answers to questions, so we can best serve our clients. We've been around since 1967. We're one of the first food testing labs in the U.S., and we've been through every regulation thus far. So we're excited to help folks out with compliance, and we're here to help.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time today, Dr. Dagan, and look forward to hearing from you when we get the final regulations. I think there's a bit of frustration out there. Every time we hear it's coming, and just waiting for those final, what do I absolutely, minimally have to do?
Yeah, I agree. People have been waiting for a long time to hear what the FDA had to say. Even if it's a proposed rule, it gives you a great amount of information about what that final rule is going to look like. And a good thing to do is not only to subscribe to the FDA website. They have RSS feeds where they will update you when they post new items. But also, if people are interested, they can subscribe to the ABC Research Laboratories blog, where we put all kinds of updates on anything related to food safety and food quality.
Very good. Well, I'd like to now conclude by thanking you for your time and looking forward to your future comments if you'd be so inclined to be accepting an invitation from the AME Food Testing Show to update us when the final regs come out.
I'd be happy to, Andy. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Dagan, and wish you a great day.
All right, you too.
Bye.
Bye-bye.